That has been made about the Churban Beis Hamikdash. We describe the laws of Tisha B'Av as more or less based on the laws of Avelos. Of course, obviously Tisha B'Av is more than mourning because an Avel does not have to fast, and we fast on Tisha B'Av. But many of the other observances are connected to the notion of mourning, the notion of Avelos. But when you compare the pattern of private Avelos with Avelos over the Churban of the Beis Hamikdash, it seems to move in opposite directions. Let's first take private Avelos. When, God forbid, someone suffers a bereavement, a parent dies, a spouse dies, God forbid a child dies, so the Avelos starts off at a very, very strict level. There is the Shiva, where a person does not even leave the house. And then it gets a little easier. You go out during Shloshim, but you are restricted in Simcha, various other things. And for every relative other than a parent, after Shloshim, there's no Avelos at all. For a parent, we have Avelos for up to a year. But certainly after Shloshim, the laws are much easier than they are during Shloshim. So the Mahalech, the trajectory of Avelos in the private sphere, is we go from the Chamor, we go from the more severe, to the Kal, to the more lenient. By contrast, when we have a designated time of year where we focus on the Churban Beis Hamikdash, we move in the opposite direction. Now, the truth of the matter is, as I think I mentioned during Kinos, and the Shulchan Aruch says in the very first siman, that a person should be thinking about the Beis Hamikdash every single day. This is why there was a minhag in Klal Yisrael. Fewer people do it today, but it's still such a minhag. Tikkun Chatzos, every midnight, person gets up or doesn't go to sleep until they pray for the Beis Hamikdash. So the idea of the Beis Hamikdash is something that should preoccupy our minds at all times, but still, during the 3 weeks is a time when we get very focused on it. Now, if we look at how the mourning pattern operates, we see that unlike regular mourning, that starts off strict and gets progressively easier, this is a mourning that starts off easy and gets progressively more strict. So we have the 3 weeks. So first of all, for many Sephardim, like 3 weeks is nothing. I mean, they have the fast of Tammuz, but there's no particular 3-week restrictions. Okay, so for Ashkenazim, we don't get haircuts, we don't listen to music. Then you get Rosh Chodesh Av, the 9 days, which are stricter. We don't eat meat, we don't do laundry, we don't wash. And then you have the week of Tisha B'Av, which would have started Sunday. That's even stricter. And then Erev Tisha B'Av and Tisha B'Av, the crescendo of Avelos. So it's an opposite pattern. Private mourning goes from strict to easy. Public mourning over the Churban Beis Hamikdash goes from easy to strict. Why is there a reversal of that pattern? Rav Soloveitchik used to explain that is because at least one spiritual dimension of the Avelos works in opposite ways. When a person loses a loved one, their lives are shattered. They're often unable to go on. They feel devastated, they feel broken. They don't know how they're going to manage. So one of the functions of Avelos is to create a reentry system where la'at I can get habituated to being able to resume my place in the world. That doesn't mean you forget your grief. The grief is going to be ever present. But there's a process called compartmentalization of the grief, where it becomes, it's in your head, but you're able to go on because it's the Ratzon Hashem, ultimately, that as long as we're alive, we live. As long as we're in the world, there's stuff to do. There's Torah, there's mitzvahs, there's chesed, there's accomplishment. One is not supposed to be immobilized by grief. And that's why the tachlis of Avelis is to move you from the immobilization and paralysis to be able to assume your role in human existence once again. With the Churban, and that's why you go from the Chomer to the Kal, because the end process is to bring you out of your grief so you can live again. With the Churban Beis HaMikdash, Litzarenu HaGadol, it is very, very, very different. How many of us are so devastated with the loss of the Beis HaMikdash that we can't go on and we need a re-entry procedure? You know, it's like a person could have a new excuse for not making Seder or not coming to davening. They say, Rebbe, I just couldn't get out of bed. The thought of not having the Beis HaMikdash devastated me. I couldn't move. Well, you can try it, but my guess is it wouldn't be that niskabel. Because for the vast overwhelming majority of all of us, I include myself, that's not the way it is. What is it that we're even crying about anyway? You know, there's a famous Israeli story, it's part of Israeli culture, that in 1967, when Israel was able to regain B'chasdei Hashem, the old city of Yerushalayim, which had been in Jordanian hands from 48 to 67, and the Temple Mount, Harav, and people were able to go to the Kaisel HaMaravi, which did not look like it looked today. It was just a little bit of wall above the ground, but still the Kaisel HaMaravi. So the first group of Chayalim that got there were the religious Chayalim, the Hester Chayalim, who were there, and they were davening with a lot of fervor, a lot of kavanah. They were crying, a mixture of cries of tears, of joy, and also tears of grief, because it's not, the Kaisel is not the Beis HaMikdash. It's not even a wall of the Beis HaMikdash, but it's a shrid, it's a remnant. So next to these religious soldiers who are sobbing and crying with deep emotion, there was a secular man who knew nothing about this. And he started crying as well. And his friends asked him mockingly, why are you crying? You don't know what this is. This means nothing to you. Temple, what is it? And the man responded, I'm crying because I don't know why they're crying. And that makes me sad. The fact that they're crying means there's something very powerful here. And I have no idea what it is. And that makes me cry. So we tell this story, and we say, oh, you see, chaval, how sad it is. The Jew that's so far from Torah has no idea what the Beis HaMikdash was. But the truth of the matter is, the response of the Chiloni is exactly what each and every one of us faces. What is it that we cry about? What is it that we mourn about? What is it that we miss? What is it that we don't have, and what is it that we will have? A person who is born blind, can never really know what color is. And a person who is born deaf, can never really know what music is. What idea can we possibly have? Our parents never saw a mikdash, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. We had no idea. You know, the Medrash Eicha actually gives a very moving story. It mentions that Rav Yochanan, who lived, many years after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, on Tisha B'Av, he would recount the different sorrows that Klal Yisrael suffered. And he was able to come up with hundreds of them, hundreds of different tragedies. So somebody asked him that in an earlier door, which was much closer to the Churban, they only came up with 50. They didn't have as big a list as you came up with. Like, how do you come up with such a big list when they came up with a much smaller list? So Rav Yochanan was masber this way. They were close to the Churban. They felt it so acutely that when they began to mention the tsaros, they couldn't go on. They broke down sobbing. They broke down crying. They couldn't even enumerate all of the things that had happened. We are so far, it doesn't affect us the same way. So we can talk about all of the different things. It's like somebody, God forbid, who was in a concentration camp might not be able to describe the atrocities in all the detail that the detached observer might be able to describe them, simply because when it really, really affected you, sometimes you're not even able to express it, as it were. So we're in that situation. Somebody asked us, Sfas Emes, what does a person do who cannot cry over the Beis HaMikdash? And the Sfas Emes's answer was, cry over our neshama that cannot cry over the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Yeah, I don't know what the Churban Beis HaMikdash was, but I know that I'm not really crying over it. And therefore, that's something to cry about. That's really something to cry about. The Churban of our neshama that doesn't even know. Clearly, it's not about a beautiful building. There are beautiful buildings in the world, the Taj Mahal, and there are beautiful buildings in Yerushalayim. And indeed, the Belzer Beis Knesset, or the Belzer Beis Medrash, somewhat resembles the Beis HaMikdash, because that's a Makom Kadesh, but it's not the Beis HaMikdash. People call it the Beis HaMikdash. So we have a building that looks like the Beis HaMikdash. What's the big deal? So obviously, the Beis HaMikdash was a symbol of something that was much more deeper and much more profound. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence that was within us. Remember that the very first time we were commanded to build a Beis HaMikdash, that's the commandment to build a Mishkan in the desert. V'yaseh li mikdash, make for me a holy place, Hashem says. V'shachanti b'seicham, so I will dwell in them. Now, although this is often said b'shem Chazal, there is no Chazal this way, but it is something that is brought in the Shalah and the Alshech, so it is brought in different sources, that it does not say, Hashem says, I will dwell in the building, but I will dwell in your heart and in your soul. The Mishkan, Mishkan means dwelling place. The Mishkan of Hashem is in the heart and the soul of every person who truly wants to be connected to Hashem. As the Kutzker Rebbe said, can Hashem be found? Hashem can be found wherever he's let in. If you let him in, he's there. If you don't let him in, he's not there. Hashem will not invade you, so to speak. So, if it's true that the greatness of a Beis HaMikdash is because v'shachanti b'seicham, so the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed when Klal Yisrael is no longer able to be a repository for the Shekhinah. In other words, you read the pasuk in reverse. V'yaseh li mikdash v'shachanti b'socham. So when there's no v'shachanti b'socham, there is no mikdash. The Medrash tells us when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, the first Beis HaMikdash, he was very proud of himself. He said, I have conquered the house of God. I have vanquished God. I'm stronger than God because I took over his house. I kicked him out. Hashem responded, I don't know how Hashem responded to Nebuchadnezzar, but Hashem responded, you didn't kick me out of my house. I don't live there anymore. And when I don't live there anymore, it's like any other abandoned building that anybody could destroy. You have ground up flour that is already ground. This is an amazing statement because what it really says is that the 9th of Av was not the real day that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. The real day that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed is some unknown date in Jewish history when the Shekhinah was no longer in the critical mass of hearts and souls that it needed to be in. And when that happened, the mikdash was no longer a mikdash. The mikdash was an abandoned warehouse. An abandoned warehouse, any shagets can destroy it. Nebuchadnezzar could destroy it. Titus could destroy it. Anybody could destroy it. Because God was not there anymore. Because mikdash means v'shachanti b'socham. When there is no v'shachanti b'socham, there is no mikdash. The koyach of the mikdash as being symbolic of the Shekhinah can be seen in a very powerful story in the Medrash Rabbah. Parshas told us. If you remember, when Yaakov dressed up like Esav, and he was impersonating Esav when he goes to Yitzchak. So the pasuk says, "Vayarach es reach begadav." Yitzchak smelled the aroma, the scent of the goat skins that Yaakov was wearing, and he said, "Re'ei reach b'ni kareach hasadeh asher berchai Hashem." Behold, the fragrance of my son is like the field that God has blessed. So again, the pashtus is Yitzchak likes the hunting clothes. But the Medrash says the following. On the words, Vayarach es reach bigadav. He smelled the scent, the aroma of the clothing. The word bigadav, if you take out the vowels, could be read, he smelled the bogdav. He smelled the treacherous people, the traitors, the apostates. That Yitzchak had a prophetic vision of the future generations that would be Rishayim and sinners. And he said, even they are blessed by God. Even the rebellious sinners are blessed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the story that the Medrash says is, Kagon, for example, Yosef Meshisa. Yosef Meshisa, name of a man. Yosef Meshisa was not a good person. Yosef Meshisa was a collaborator with the Romans in destroying the Beis HaMikdash, in afflicting Jews, just as unfortunately there were people who collaborated with the Nazis for various reasons. And at some point, Titus said to Yosef Meshisa, in recognition of your services, you can go into the Beis HaMikdash and take whatever you want as a souvenir. Take some gold, take some silver. You can keep it as your reward. Yosef Meshisa comes in, and he comes out with the menorah. A little much. It was big, heavy, gold, solid gold. So Titus said, not that. As you know, in the Arch of Titus, Titus brought the menorah back to Rome. In fact, the whole machlokas, the menorah in Titus's arch is rounded. As you know, the Shita of the Rambam is like the Chabad menorah, comes out in diagonal points. So the question is, can the Arch of Titus be a proof against the Rambam? On one hand, what? Who's a Titus is going to be a Paisek? On the other hand, Lamaisa, it was at the time of the event itself. Okay, without getting into that question, Yosef Meshisa wanted the menorah, and Titus said, no going. Go in for something else. Take a spoon or whatever it is. Yosef Meshisa said, I have angered my master once, my creator once. I will not go in a second time. And they offered him stuff. They said, well, you can take this and that. They even offered him 3 years of tax revenue from different provinces. He said no. Finally, they said, go in again, or we will murder you, we will kill you. And he refused. He kept on saying the same thing. I have angered my creator once. I will not anger my creator again. And he died a horrible death. He was tortured to death with great, great, great suffering. And Chazal say, you see, even the Breitowitz, even the Jews who are treacherous, even the Jews who are Rishayim. Inside, there is goodness. Inside, there's Kedusha. The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that within every neshama of a Jew is a deep love of Hashem and a deep yiras Hashem, fear meaning reverence of Hashem. You don't have to learn it. It's not something that a Jew acquires. It's there. Elamai, it gets covered up. It gets obscured. There's a Yetzer Hara. But in moments of great stress, that the true essence will sometimes come out. And that's why the Balatanya says, even Jews who are very, very, very far from seemingly serving Hashem will be willing to give their lives al Kiddush Hashem in those extreme moments. Some of you might remember Daniel Pearl. He was a reporter, not a religious Jew. He was in fact intermarried, and he was kidnapped, I think, by either ISIS or Al Qaeda. I don't remember now. And mamash on YouTube, they put they were going to kill him. They did kill him, and they wanted him to renounce Judaism and say, I accept Muhammad. And he said, my father was a Jew, I'm a Jew, and I will die as a Jew. And he was killed. Yesh kaina olama, as Chazal say, a person get olam haba with 1 second. He refused to deny that he was a Jew. So Yosef Meshisa, on one hand, is an example of that. The idea that there is what is called a pintel yid. But still, the Panovich Harav does ask the kasha. He went in the first time. Why was he so reluctant to go the second time? What was the difference between the first time and the second time? So the Panovich Harav's answer is because by the second time, he had been in the Beis HaMikdash. That changed him. His contact with the Beis HaMikdash elevated him, transformed him. So that which was totally possible before he had gone into the Mikdash, he changed. This was the kayach of being connected to the Beis HaMikdash, that it could change a Rasha Gomer into a righteous and pure person who is willing to die al Kiddush Hashem. You see the same thing in the Nevuah of Yecheskel. We see in the Nevuah of Yecheskel that Yecheskel's Nevuah at the end gives us the diagram for the third Beis HaMikdash, the one that will come, B'ezras Hashem. The Karav, possibly today, certainly tomorrow. And Yecheskel gives you a diagram. He doesn't give you a diagram, he gives you a psukim, and you got to reconstruct the pictures, and that's always complicated. But he mentions the halacha that there are 13 gates to the courtyard. Each tribe has its own gate, and there's one gate for those who don't know their tribe. But he mentions an interesting halacha that if you enter via one gate, you have to leave via another gate. In other words, if you enter in the north, you got to leave in the south. You enter to the east, you got to leave in the west. You don't leave by the same gate through which you came in. What is the lesson there? You don't come out the same way you entered. This is a physical manifestation of the notion that the Beis HaMikdash transformed us. Now, just to go back to my original question. So why does the Ave, right, the Avelis of a private person starts off strict and gets progressively easier? Because the purpose is to move us away from devastation towards being able to function. The Avelis over the Chorban is exactly the opposite. We don't need to get out of being devastated. Our problem is we're not devastated at all. We need to feel the devastation. And the hope would be, it's a hope, because there's no guarantee on that maybe the more we afflict ourselves in external things, not washing, not cutting hair, not eating meat, maybe the chitzonius will be mashpia, will have influence on the panemius. Maybe. You see? The goal of Avelis over the Churban is not to get out of our grief. The goal of Avelis for the Churban is to get into a grief that we otherwise don't feel. But in Ruchnius, there is a very, very important principle, a general principle in Ruchnius, that even if you're not on a level to do something, and even if you're not on a level to want to do something, you can still be on a level, I wish that I wanted. And that counts as well. In fact, B'Shem the Arizal, whatever this means exactly, they say this can go as much as 13 levels. I wish that I would wish that I would wish that I would want that I would wish, etc., even if it's that deep. So if we're not ready to cry over the Churban, we can at least be people that said, I wish I could cry over the Churban. I wish that I could cry over the Churban. That counts for something too. I want to be, and this is true in all aspects of Avodas Hashem, I want to be a person that is margish, a lack in my life. I want to be a person who feels there's something empty in me because we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, meaning Hashras HaShechina, and all of those inyanim. And in that way, that also counts as a certain idea of being misabel over Yerushalayim. The idea of the Shekhinah. Now, the truth of the matter is, some people say the following. Some people say, we're in a difficult matzav in Klal Yisrael. It's very reminiscent a little bit of a chazal that talks about a person who encountered a snake and was saved from the snake, and he was very happy till he had a bear, and then he was saved from the bear, and he was happy until he had a lion, meaning as soon as you get out of one problem, we have other problems that are even worse. October 7th, we had, of course, the tragedy of more than 1,000 people being murdered by Hamas, and then hostages. And we're not out of that yet. Hamas has not been crushed, and most importantly, Chatufim. There are Chatufim besides the many that have died in captivity. There are Chatufim that are still languishing, that need our tefillas. So even the Hamas thing is not over, far from over. But before Hamas is even over, we got this problem with Hezbollah, and which could theoretically be a much, much worse threat, and the like. So we kind of get partially saved from one thing, and we get something even worse. So some people say, if there's any silver lining in it, the silver lining is, this way we can mourn much more on Tisha B'Av, we can yearn for Mashiach more. Because things are so bad that, I need Mashiach, I need Beis HaMikdash. Meaning, it's easier to yearn for Geula when you have tzaros than it is when you don't have tzaros. It makes sense, but if you think about it, that's ultimately a very superficial stopgap measure. A person doesn't say, or a person shouldn't say or shouldn't think, I yearn for Geula because then I'm not going to have problems anymore. I yearn for Geula so I shouldn't have these bad people doing bad things to us. That is really a collateral effect. That is a side effect. The yearning for Geula is not simply because, it saves us from the bad people who want to do bad things to us. That's only a negative. That looks at Geula as Hashem will take away the negatives. And if I could be in Florida without any of these bad people around, I would be just as happy. Is that what Geula is about? Geula is about Kirvas Elokim, closeness to God, feeling Hashem in your life, feeling that the Shekhinah is with you. So, maybe it's easier to hope for Mashiach when times are difficult in the narrow sense that the enemies will be taken away. But Tzipisa Yeshua, yearning for Geula, is a much, much deeper idea than that. So what do? So ultimately, Chazal tell us Tisha B'Av is the day that Mashiach is born. Maharal is masber that this doesn't mean necessarily that the physical birthday of the person who will be Mashiach has to be Tisha B'Av. There might be other days. But it means that which brings Mashiach into the world is the magnitude of the yearning you have to be connected to Hashem. Meaning, the birth of Mashiach means the birth of the koyach of Mashiach. I had mentioned in Kinos, Rav Hutner's point, when he was asked what he missed about Aliyah. So he said he missed living in Chutz La'aretz because of the intensity of his yearning to be in Eretz Yisrael. Very, very interesting. A person lives in Chutz La'aretz, and a person yearns and dreams of the day that they will come to Eretz Yisrael. They think about it all the time. And it occupies them. It obsesses them. And that creates a very strong kesher to Eretz Yisrael, because it's in their mind, it's in their hearts. Then they come here. And they come here and they face the normal struggles of life, superimposed with the extra stuff that happens. And the enthusiasm may not be as strong. Shakespeare said, absence makes the heart grow fonder. The point is, there can sometimes be an extraordinarily strong degree of closeness and intimacy based on absence, which might even be more powerful than presence. This is what Tisha B'Av is. Tisha B'Av is an acute awareness of how far we are from Hashem. How far we are. How distant we are. Without a mikdash, we don't even know what it is we don't have. But paradoxically, as I focus on how far I am from Hashem, and I can mourn over that, and I can cry over that, and Hashem is doing the same thing. As the Gemara in Brachos says, Hashem cries, alas to the father that exiled his children from his table. And we cry, alas to the children that are exiled from their father's table. And we cry, and Hashem cries. And we know how far we are and how disconnected we are. In the perception of that disconnection lies a very, very powerful closeness. It is the closeness of distance. It is the closeness that comes when two entities that love each other are so far apart, but they yearn to want to be together. And therefore Tisha B'Av is a very, very powerful day of love of Hashem. Love of Hashem, our love of Hashem, and Hashem's love for us. It is the love that comes from an awareness of distance. And when you have an awareness of that distance, that creates a tremendous kesher. The absence creates a tremendous kesher. And that is really the meaning, as I said, of why Tisha B'Av is the day Mashiach is born. That is why Tisha B'Av is called a moed, a holiday. That is why we do not say Tachanun on Tisha B'Av, like we don't say on a Yom Tov. That is why there's an old Yerushalmi minhag that women clean their houses, sweep the floors on Tisha B'Av in honor of Mashiach. And I think I had mentioned at the beginning of Kinos, a long time ago already, that Rabbi Elazar HaKalir, who wrote so many Kinos about mourning and grief, actually wrote a whole other set of piyutim that are based on redemption and geula. They're called Pirkei Nechama, chapters of comfort. And his original intention was, you read the Kinais until Chatzais, and you read the Pirkei Nechama after Chatzais. Mamish, it's like having another Kinos service, except instead of Kinos, it would be encouraging Prakim of Nechama. I had been looking, I had read this a long time ago. I had actually been looking. I'd like to find where they are. I was not able to find them, but just this year, somebody sent me. It's from Machzor Roma, the old Roman Machzor. Actually had the Pirkei Nechama on Tisha B'Av that were recited after Mincha. But our minhag is not to do it. We don't recite Pirkei Nechama. But it's still the case. I mean, you'll notice in Shachris, we didn't say Lam Natseach, which is Yancha Hashem b'yom tzara. God should answer you on a day of distress. Well, gee, you'd figure this is the greatest day of distress that there is. Not really, because in this day is the secret of Mashiach. We didn't say Tachanan. It's called a Moed. A wondrous thing. Yearning over the sense of distance can create a closeness that is the greatest type of closeness that there can be. And that is why a person can actually have a great sense of being connected to Hashem on Tisha B'Av. You know, they say some people connect more to Hashem on overtly happier days, Purim or whatever, and some connect to Hashem very deeply on a day like Tisha B'Av itself. You're grieving with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You know, it's, the Medrash says, beautiful Medrash, a Medrash that's very mysterious, that when Hashem destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem himself wanted to cry. Hashem himself wanted to grieve. The Malachei Asharis told Hashem, you're not allowed to do that, God. You got to run a world. You can't fall apart. You got to run the ship. You can't just break down. And Hashem said, if you will not let me grieve, I will go to a hidden room and I will grieve all by myself. As the pasuk said, b'mistarim tibcha nafshi. In the hidden place, I will sob. And the Piaseczner Rebbe, who wrote during the Holocaust, Mamish, basically describes that Hashem is basically saying, without a mikdash, without my Shekhinah in the world, why is there a world? The whole world just isn't worth it anymore. And therefore, he would have destroyed the world, or the world would have just ceased to exist. The Malachim say, you can't do that. The world still has to be around. So Hashem, Kavyachol, has to keep his grief to himself. Meaning, again, these are anthropomorphic descriptions, but he can't like fall apart. The world got to go on. But Hashem has this tremendous suffering. So when we suffer with Hashem, that's tremendously close. They tell them, I in Yerushalayim, a great tzaddik died. This is like 200 years ago. A great tzaddik died, and they found the key that he was holding, and no one knew what the key was for. And then they noticed there were like 5 other tzaddikim who died that had a key. I don't remember all the details, but the story basically was that this is a key to like a hidden cave somewhere near the Harav. And it was said, this is the place where Hashem cries, b'mistarim tibcha nafshi. And in every generation there were 10 people that are zocha to cry with the Shekhinah in that particular place. Again, we don't really know the meaning of this. But this is the notion of sharing in Hashem's grief creates a tremendous kirva. These are some things to think about. Again, I can say the words, I can say this point or that point. The question is, do we really feel it? What do we do about it? How do we understand what it is we don't have? Very, very, very difficult. But the Talmud Yerushalmi tells us that in every generation in which the Beis HaMikdash is not rebuilt is as guilty as the generation of the Chorban itself. Now, it's important to understand this is not an obvious statement. This Yerushalmi is actually saying a very big chiddush. Without the Yerushalmi, I might have said like this. The generation that lost the Beis HaMikdash was guilty of really bad stuff. Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayah, Shvichas Damim, the first Beis HaMikdash. The second Beis HaMikdash, Sinas Chinam. They were guilty of bad stuff. The fact that I don't have the Beis HaMikdash doesn't mean that I'm guilty of that. It just means I don't have the special merit to get it back. That's what I might have said without the Yerushalmi. So what is the Yerushalmi teaching me? You don't need a special zechus to get the Beis HaMikdash back. All we need, is not to be guilty of the Averos that caused the Chorban. So if Chazal say the Beis HaMikdash happened because of A, B, C, D, E, F, and we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, it gotta be we still have A, B, C, D, E, F. Because if we didn't have it, we would have the Beis HaMikdash. That's the Yerushalmi's chiddush. Every generation in which the Beis HaMikdash is not rebuilt is guilty as the generation of the Chorban. To put it another way that maybe is a bit graphic, a person should look as if the Beis HaMikdash is burning this very moment. Every single day it is not built, it is being destroyed in front of our eyes. It is being destroyed in front of our eyes. We are machriv the Beis HaMikdash every day that we do not have it. So obviously, therefore, we have to look at the reasons Chazal gave us for the Chorban and resolve to rectify them in our own lives. So now let me go back to the first Beis HaMikdash, because we often don't talk about those Averos. We say that the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shvichas Damim. Now, you may ask this, do we really care why the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed? After all, we got back a second Beis HaMikdash, and maybe we should only focus on Sinas Chinam, which, by the way, there's plenty to focus on for sure. But it's not really relevant why the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, because we got that back. That's a mistake. Because the emes is that even when we were zocha to a second Beis HaMikdash, we never really gained what we lost in the first Beis HaMikdash. The first Beis HaMikdash had an Aron HaKodesh with the luchos. The first Beis HaMikdash had nevuah. The first Beis HaMikdash, the Kohen Gadol, had the prophetic powers of the Urim B'Tumim. So in a sense, we are misabel not only the second Beis HaMikdash, we are misabel over the first Beis HaMikdash, ad kedei kach, that the Rambam says in the Perush HaMishnayos, the Maseches Rosh Hashanah, that they fasted on Tisha B'Av during the 420 years of the second Beis HaMikdash. Now you might say that doesn't make sense. Why would I fast on Tisha B'Av if I have a Beis HaMikdash? The answer is, you didn't have the Beis HaMikdash that you lost. So if that's so, the point I'm making is, when we think about the Averos that caused the Chorban, we're not only thinking about the Bayis Sheni, although I hasten to add, there's plenty to think about Sinas Chinam, but we're even thinking about Bayis Rishon, Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shvichas Damim. So on that, you may ask me a kasha. We're not that bad. Okay, it's one thing. Sinas chinam, lashon hara, okay, that we still have, okay, I got it. Avodah zara, gilui arayah, shvichas damim. Is that Klal Yisrael's problem? I got to do a cheshbon hanefesh on avodah zara, gilui arayah, shvichas damim. Surely that's an exaggeration. So let me just address very, very briefly how, unfortunately, we still have a shaychus. We still have a connection, even to avodah zara, gilui arayah, shvichas damim. First of all, Chazal tell us certain averos are comparable to the three chamuros. Chazal say, for example, anyone that has anger is tantamount to avodah zarah. So anger is a form of avodah zarah. Chazal say, hamalbim pnei chaveira barabim. If you humiliate people in a public way, that is the same as murder. So maybe I don't bow to an idol, but I may have anger. Maybe I don't stick a knife into somebody's heart, but I may have humiliated them. And even with gilui arayos, Chazal say, hirhurei avera, sexual thoughts or sexual fantasies might be as bad or worse than the avera itself. So the truth is, many of us may still have some connection in one form or another to avodah zara, gilui arayah, shvichas damim. Right? That's answer number one. Answer number two. You know, the Beis Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo, had a very good chavrusa. He actually had an angel that he would learn Torah with. He would call the angel his Magid. And he actually wrote a diary, not intended for publication, a diary of his conversations with the angel, called Magid Mesharim. You can get the Sefer is printed. In the Magid Mesharim, he tells the following story. I don't remember all the details, some of my details may not be accurate, but this is the basic story. He was learning a very difficult sugya in Gemara. He was a Gadol Hador, but he couldn't understand Pshat, and he worked in Miyageya, and after weeks and weeks and weeks, he finally has good Pshat. He walks by in the narrow alleyways of Tzfat. Right, you've been there. And he overhears a shoemaker learning with his 7-year-old son the same Gemara. And the son asks his father the very kasha that the Beis Yosef was working on for 2 weeks. So I assumed Beis Yosef didn't want to eavesdrop, but he was still kind of curious how this would play out. And the father was annoyed. The father said to the son, I knew this was too hard for you. We shouldn't have been learning it. You're asking me such a simple question, and the explanation is this. And he gave exactly the answer that the Beis Yosef took 2 weeks to get. And the father is annoyed that the 7-year-old even had the question. So the Beis Yosef was heartbroken because he figured, if this is such a simple question or a simple answer, and I didn't get it, it must be that Hashem is angry at me. It must be I'm not worthy. So he had the angel. He says, what's the Aveira that I got to do tshuva on? What is my chisaron? Why couldn't I get such an obvious thing that a 7-year-old is supposed to get it? So the Malach told him, it's the other way around. He said, the insight you brought into the world was a very deep insight that the world was not worthy of. Through your work, through your yigiyah, through your toil, you brought it into the world. Once you brought it into the world, even a kid could get it. Yes, the kid could get it. You brought it into the world. So that's the end of the story. What's the pshat? You brought it into the world. He didn't teach anybody. He didn't explain it. He didn't write it down. This was a private thing in his head. You brought it into the world. So what do you see? You see that this is the nature of ruchnius. This is the nature of kedusha. We bring kedusha into the world. The world gets changed. The world gets elevated. It makes no difference if it's public. It makes no difference if it's a share. I'm sitting and learning Torah. You're sitting and learning Torah in the privacy of your Beis Medrash, in the privacy of your room. There are ripples of hashpa'ah that comes into it all. The Chavetz Chaim used to say, that the tznius in Paris was affected by the intensity of learning in Radin. It's like an atom bomb. You have ground zero. Ground zero is where the radiation is most intense. Okay, so intensive learning in Radin didn't translate into intensive learning in Paris. Right? It gets attenuated. But eventually, by the time it gets to Paris, the skirts will be a quarter inch lower. Ripple effects. You bring Torah into the world, somehow it becomes accessible. That's the good news. That's why Chazal say, one of the definitions of an apikairis is someone who says, Maya hani la rabbanan, what do the rabbis do for us? They learn. Ignoring that, Baruch Hashem, Gedolim teach also, but they just learn themselves. That's apikairis. The Torah, the mitzvahs, the kedusha brings bracha into the world. So, unfortunately, therefore, when you look in a world that's filled with evil, and now again, I don't want to give chizuk to anti-Semites, but you know, when anti-Semites say they blame the Jews for everything, they're not so wrong in a ruchniistic sense. Because if the world is perverted in so many ways, it's because we have not brought enough kedusha into the world. Because the kedusha that we could bring into the world could change the world in a lot of ways. So, I started off with the question, why do I have to be Mesakein, Avodah Zorah, Gila Rai, Shvichus Damim? I'm not guilty of that. Maybe that's so. But if we live in a world of Shvichus Damim, which we do, we live in a world of Giloy Arayos, which we certainly do. Avodah Zarah too. The Gra says money is like the new Avodah Zarah, a world of rampant materialism, which we ourselves might be guilty of. But even if we're not guilty of it, if we would bring more Kedusha into the world itself would be different. And therefore, in a sense, we are accountable not only for the Avodah Zarah, Gilei Araya, Shvichas Damim, that we do ourselves, we are responsible for the state of the world. The world could have been a different place. Again, we're not perfect, so obviously we're not going to make the world perfect. That's not the teviyah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has on us. But the spiritual state of the world is connected to Klal Yisrael. As I say, the anti-Semites who use this in a very unfair way, there is a point. There is a point in what they're saying. Jews are responsible because we have the kayach to bring Kedusha into the world. We have the kayach to bring Tuma into the world. We have a kayach to change the direction in which the world is going. The third answer of why we still think about Avodah Zarah, Gilai Shvichas Damim, is a thought of Rav Tzadok. And Rav Tzadok says, Avodah Zarah, Gilai Shvichas Damim are really symptoms of much deeper spiritual flaws. Pirkei Avos tells us that hakina, jealousy, taiva, lust for sensual material pleasures, kavod, the arrogance of ego, maitziin es ha'adam min ha'olam, they take a person out of the world, they destroy a person. Rav Tzadok wants to say, the extreme manifestation of jealousy is murder. The kinah can be so burning that you take away a person's life because you want what they have. Taiva is Gilui Arayos. And Avodah Zarah is covered because when you make yourself more important than God, that's self-idolatry. So Rav Tzadok's argument is, even if I'm not guilty of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Shvichas Damim, I'm still guilty of kinah, taiva, v'kavod. And therefore, the root causes of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Shvichas Damim, I still have. Okay? So this is why we think about the Mikdash Rishon. The Mikdash Sheni, what can I say? Chazal say, the first Mikdash was destroyed, because of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayis, Shvichas Damim. The second Mikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam, groundless hatred. And the Gemara in Yuma says, Bo Urei, come and see. The first Mikdash that was destroyed because of the Gimel Chamurais the Churban only lasted 70 years. And the second Mikdash that was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam, we're still in that Golus. But here's the question. Who hates for no reason? Sinas Chinam? Nobody hates for no reason. You hate somebody, you don't like somebody, you don't care, and someone asks, well, why do you hate the person? You're going to say, no reason? You have a reason. Everybody has a reason. So what's Sinas Chinam? One could make the argument, there's no such thing as Sinas Chinam, because human beings have a reason. So the answer has to be that even when you think you have a reason, it's not a reason. It's not a reason. Now, it's a complicated question. There is a musag in halacha about hating Rishayim. There is a musag in halacha about hating Apikorsim and Kofrim. It's an issue that has to be discussed, but I just want to point out the Chazon Ish, who is not a modern Orthodox rabbi. The Chazon Ish writes that Bizman Hazeh, and he wrote this probably 1940s or earlier, Bizman Hazeh, the laws about Rishayim, Kaifrim, Apikorsim largely do not apply, because in times where the divine presence is concealed, the time when most of Klal Yisrael are not keeping mitzvahs, so you're no longer rebelling against the tzibor, so to speak. People, he doesn't use the word tinok. People often paraphrase the Chazon Ish, tinok shenishba. He actually does not use that phrase there, but it's ke'ilu tinok shenishba, and the most important thing is the ending of his statement. He says, the Paisha Yisrael can only be reached biavosos ava. This is from Hosea. Ropes, cords of love. Chizuk, support. Condemnation of ideas is certainly legitimate, obviously. There are shitas, there are deos, there are ideas that one needs to argue with sometimes. But it doesn't have to turn into attacking people. People can be ignorant. People can be misinformed. People can be wrong-headed. People can be stubborn. By the way, that includes us too. I don't just mean other people. But that's not the same as saying people are evil. That's not the same as saying people are Amalek. That type of lashon creates pirud, divisiveness. And I've mentioned many, many, many times, so forgive me for repeating, the pasuk of Shlomo HaMelech in Mishlei. Kamayim apanim el panim, kain leifa adam liadam. As water reflects the face that you show the water, so the heart of a person reflects that which you show that person. What does that mean? I look in a reflecting pool of water. If I smile at that pool, I see a smiling face. If I frown at that pool, I see back a frowning face. The water reflects back that which you show it. Shlomo HaMelech, the Chacham Mikol Adam, says, this is how a human being reacts. I show somebody respect. I show somebody akaras hatov. I show somebody legitimation as a person. They will be open to seeing that in me. I show someone zilzal, denigration. I communicate that they're worthless, they're evil, they're no good. They're going to see me that way. Which is basically why religious, secular machlokas in Eretz Yisrael never gets resolved. Because this is exactly what happens all the time. I'm Amalek and you're a parasite, or whatever it goes. Name after name, denigration after denigration, endless spirals of being mavatel everybody. If instead, a little hakaras hatov, a little appreciation, even when there's disagreement. We have Shlomo HaMelech telling us Kamayim apanim el panim. Kain leva adam li adam. So we divide ourselves in so many groups and subgroups and tiny groups. You know, in America, we kind of have, I don't know, between 3 and 6 branches of Judaism. There's conservative, Reform, Orthodox, then there's Yeshiva, Hasidic, whatever. You're not going to get more than 10, depending on how you divide it up. So you have 10 groupings. Here, Baruch Hashem, they say like the Eskimos have like 30 words for white because they have to identify every shade of white because it's important where they can walk safely on snow, whatever it is. So they're sensitive. They see maros, like Negoyim. They see maros of whiteness that we're not even sensitive to. So Baruch Hashem, there's a great sensitivity to Torah in Eretz Israel. So we see the smallest, subtle, little differences as huge and major and insurmountable. Things that, the average American person, including myself, don't even notice. Like, what on earth is the machlokas between A and B on a given nekuda? It's not perceptible to the normal naked eye. But this ultimately becomes sinas chinam. So the big challenge in life is to have shittas, to be firm in your hashkafas, to believe in what you believe to be the yesodas of Torah. Don't compromise on ikarim. But at the same time, be makir that there are different ways of looking at things, and be makir that even a shita that's not my shita may have nekudas of emes that are worthy of respect. And even if the person's nekudas are not worthy of respect, the person might be worthy of respect because they're at least trying. They're trying to come to something correct. And if Be'ezras Hashem, we could be miskaber over this could be a tremendous, tremendous tikkun for sinas chinam. Now people say, well, why do I have to start? Why do I have to see the good in him and then he'll see the good in me? Let him see the good in me and then I'll see the good in him. Okay. I mean, this is the subject of numerous marriage counselings where it's all, hey, let the other person do it first. But the answer is somebody has to be the grown-up in the room. And if you are B'nai Torah, and you have Torah, and you have the Hashkafas HaTorah, then yeah, you do what the Torah says you're supposed to do. You do it. They didn't do it to me. Okay. Whatever it is. That's not a heter, so to speak, not to do what you need to do. So again, Mark Twain once said about the weather, that everybody talks about the weather, but nobody ever does anything about it. Sinas chinam, I fear, is very much like Mark Twain about the weather. Everybody talks about it. We pull it out a few weeks during the year, and then we kind of put it back in the pocket till next Tisha B'Av, where we bring it out again. But the emes is, if there was any silver lining in the tragedies of October 7th, it was that for a few weeks, and maybe longer, maybe even now there still is a residual, there was a real sense of achdus. You may remember before October 7th, there was all this narishkeit about judicial reform, and it wasn't just a legal controversy, it was tearing apart the country. People were talking about leaving Israel, pulling money out of Israel. Soldiers were even talking about not reporting for duty, although when they had to, they did, but they were talking about not reporting for duty. And people were literally saying that this country is going to be torn apart. Then comes October 7th, and all of a sudden, there's achdus, there's unity. People are making tzitzis for the soldiers and tefillin for the soldiers and Shabbatons, different families getting together. And there was a recognition, as the saying goes, you have to hang together, otherwise you're going to hang separately. And there was a notion of Avas Yisrael and Achdus, and it was a beautiful thing. It was something we hadn't seen for many, many years. But what happens is, like an elastic band, you stretch it, but then it just goes back to what it is. L'tzarenu, it's been a long war, people get tired. We kind of fall back into the habits that we have. And that is a tragedy on top of a tragedy. The war is tragic, and the loss of life is tragic. But if we would learn from it, if we would grow from it, if we would be masake and sinas chinam from it, then l'chol hapachas, there's a tayeles. But if you go through difficulties and you remain the same, that's taka a tragedy. That's a tragedy. So B'ezras Hashem, I hope that all of us, and again, I obviously include myself, I don't mean to give muster to anybody, but all of us should try to be mechazek ourselves in these inyanim, in that way to be mesakein, the chait that was gairim the chorban, and in that way, as the Yerushalmi says, if the generation that doesn't have the mikdash is guilty of those chatoim, that means when we're not guilty of those chatoim, and we're mesakin those chatoim, we should be zeicha. May this be the last Tisha B'Av that we are Yoshev B'Tainis. May we be zeicha to the binyan Beis HaMikdash B'Meherav Yamein.